I've been doing a lot of talking about HTTPS lately, trying to make it super simple for people to get set up. HTTPSeasy.com is a great example of that. 4 short videos, 5 minutes each, and heaps of people now going through those tutorials and setting it up on their websites. Yet some people are still reluctant. They're still pushing back. They don't believe they need HTTPS, particularly on static websites. And I understand the sentiment because we've been conditioned for many years that HTTPS is something that we use on banking or on logins or on sensitive websites like Gmail. So why do you need it on a static site? This video is going to show you precisely that, courtesy of a whole bunch of demos on a website that has been offered for demo purposes. But a little bit of context first. Let's establish what it is that we're trying to protect our traffic from. Where are the points where this MITM, man-in-the-middle attack, occurs? We'll do a few basic ones quickly. And I'll start here. Planes. This is me on a Norwegian Airlines flight, opening a website over HTTP, them intercepting the website, injecting their own content into that site, and also exfiltrating the URL that I was going to. So using in-flight Wi-Fi, perfect example. ISPs, probably quite obvious, but every time you make a connection to the internet, you're going out through a service provider of one kind or another. ISPs like Comcast in the US very aggressively inject content into pages, any pages in which they can intercept the communication. So, in other words, non-secure pages. In fact, apparently it's about 400 lines of JavaScript they inject into pages like this in order to serve unwanted ads and messages. We'll talk more about the sorts of things that a man-in-the-middle can inject into a page later on. Main thing for the moment is just to establish where it can happen. And just like ISPs, hotels are the same sort of thing. In fact, you'll see this every time you go to a hotel, connect to the Wi-Fi, your browser fires up and every single non-HTTPS tab gets hijacked by the hotel. They intercept that request and load their own captive portal into the browser. So effectively, they're impersonating the website that tab is connecting to. Governments are another example. And in this case here that the Tor project was talking about recently, the state-owned Telecom Egypt was using DPI, which is Deep Packet Inspection, the ability to intercept, inspect, and inevitably modify the contents of web requests to inject ads and crypto mining scripts. We're going to have a bit of a play with the crypto mining later on, actually. But for now, the important thing to note here is the sorts of sites a government the likes of the Egyptian one was wanting to intercept and modify. Palestinian Prison Society, Women's Initiatives for Gender Justice, LGBTQI, VPN and Israeli sites. These are particularly the sorts of sites you would have a higher expectation of privacy on. When they're not served securely, governments can compel ISPs to intercept that traffic and modify it. We've seen it many times before. This is just one recent example. And finally, one of my favorite, the Wi-Fi Pineapple, a rogue wireless access hotspot that you can stand up and people will willingly connect to if you call it, say, free cafe Wi-Fi. But it's also able to trick mobile devices into connecting it if it broadcasts the name of a known network. And it can see that from the probe requests which are coming from the devices around it. And the real point of this little device here is to demonstrate just how easy it is to intercept traffic. And this is the core message at this point of the video. Everyone needs to acknowledge that traffic interception is a thing. It happens. And indeed, we expect it to happen, which is why we consciously look for HTTPS on things like banking websites and on your Gmail. I don't think anyone is arguing that we shouldn't have HTTPS on those services, which is an acknowledgement that an MITM attack is a reality. The only point of contention here is if there are some classes of websites where attacks are okay and other classes where they're not okay. Truth be told, there's nowhere that we really want traffic intercepted and maliciously modified. And that's what we're going to do now. We're going to start doing that to a static web page, going through a bunch of demos to really drive home the point that even your static website needs HTTPS. Now, I was looking for the perfect website to do this with. A static website, and preferably one where the owner didn't think it needed HTTPS. So it was great when Jacob popped up the other day and said, hey, go and try to hack my static blog. And I said, hey, this is perfect. I was looking for someone willing to have a static site they think is immune from transport layer risks used in a video on this. Thank you very much. A lot of likes on that as well, so clearly this is something people want to see. So with Jacob's permission, let's jump into it. So here's the website served over a not secure connection. So consequently, Chrome is telling us it's not secure. Now I'm in incognito mode at the moment, and as of the time of recording, incognito always warns that a not secure connection is not secure. Very shortly after the time of recording, all Chrome windows, regardless of whether you're in incognito mode or not, will do the same thing. Now this is where a lot of people have their issue, the fact that it says not secure. But of course, this is specifically about the connection being not secure. And Chrome does very explicitly tell you this. Now because all of these requests are going to be, as Chrome says here in the top of the browser, not secure, it means that any intermediary can intercept, read, and modify either the requests or the responses. Now this is what I'm doing in the background. I'm actually doing this at the proxy level. So I'm proxying through Fiddler and using Fiddler's script to do precisely the same thing that any MITM can in an airplane, or a hotel, or an ISP, or the government, or the Wi-Fi pineapple, or all these other different ways that our traffic can be modified. So let's start to investigate just how badly a static website can get messed up when it's not protecting the traffic. Now looking down the list of recent things that he has to say about here, the latest one just here looks like it is not actually live yet, so we'll skip that. Let's go down to HTTPS and privacy, which would be a very apt piece to have a look at, given the nature of this video. And what we'll see as we drill down into this post is that it loads over HTTP, and oh, there's Clippy. Clippy's come up to give us a little bit of help about learning about the HTTPS things. Not enough Clippy around these days, but fortunately when the traffic isn't secure, we can inject him wherever we'd like, so long as we have access to the traffic. So thank you, Clippy. Very good first demo there. Let's go back to the previous page. We'll pick another link. This time we'll jump down to Timer Garage Startups is over. Let's see what we have to say on this post. Now this post has a unicorn on it, and if we click the unicorn, we can begin to cornify the page. We've got a little bit of Hello Kitty over there on a unicorn. I think this does wonders, really livens the page up quite a bit. Another Hello Kitty. We can keep cornifying further and further. My 6-year-old daughter would love that one just there. We keep going, because again, the page has been intercepted and modified. We can put whatever we want on there. Like the way it's given a little bit of character to the title as well. Lovely piece of work from Cornify. Let's go back and give another one a go. We might drop down this time to social networks do's and don'ts. What's going to go on here? Now I've also cornified this page and I have preloaded multiple unicorns. And here comes the Harlem Shake. The Harlem Shake is on this page as well, because what is better than just unicorns? It's unicorns actually doing the Harlem Shake. But enough of that. I don't think anyone wants to hear any more of that song than what they absolutely need to. Let's jump back a page and start looking at some serious stuff. Now look, all of this stuff with Clippy and unicorns and Harlem Shake is a bit of fun. It's meant to be a light-hearted introduction, but let's start getting into the more serious stuff, because serving traffic over a connection that isn't secure is actually serious business. So let's now really start talking about the security implications of this not secure connection. And to do that, we'll jump down into the safety and security story just here. Now, you might be looking at this page and saying, well, there's nothing really to see. It just looks like a normal page. But the reality is much more sinister than this. And you'll see it as I drag over this window that shows my CPU usage. There's a crypto miner on this page. And this is one of the abuses that we're regularly seeing with unencrypted traffic. We saw it before on the Tor story about the Egyptian ISPs. So even though this page may look quite benign, and as we scroll through it there's absolutely nothing of note other than possibly the gas mask, there is something much more sinister going on in the background as my compute power is being stolen to mine cryptocurrency. Now this is real world stuff. We see it happen with unencrypted traffic the whole time, and that's only possible when HTTPS isn't used. Let's keep going down this path of looking at how malicious someone can be with an unencrypted website. Let's go back to the home page for a moment, and we'll go down to the next story. This one is on telecommuting. So let's drill down into this story and have a look at what happens to the page. Now watch down the bottom left-hand side of the screen. You can see waiting for 192.168.0.1. Now that's an internal IP address. This page is trying to make a connection to something else in my internal network. And if we jump into the Dev Tools, over to the Element Inspector, and start having a look at what's on the page, we'll see that there's an iframe here that's loading a page off evilcyberhacker.com, which frankly doesn't sound very good. You'll see the path here is routercsrf.html. And if we copy that path and pop it open in a new tab, what we're going to see here when we look at the source code is a form which tries to post to this local IP address /goform/wizard handle. This is a cross-site request forgery attack against Intex N150 routers. It has a CVE 2018-12529. I'm going to put that in the links on the blog post that accompanies this. If you are running this router internally and you browse to an unprotected website like the one we've been using, a malicious party in the middle has the ability to inject payloads like this which change router settings such as the administrative password. This is a fault with the router. The router needs to be fixed. There's no arguing about that. It needs to have anti-forgery tokens here. But also, we've seen this many times before with routers. I'll link to a story in the blog post about how routers were hacked in Brazil to pay for prostitutes in Rio. Now that's just one of many different stories related to CSRF vulnerabilities in routers. And when you can control the traffic of the people who own those routers, you get to start doing stuff like this. Now there's also a secondary problem related to a lack of HTTPS and someone's ability to modify settings on a local router. And that's DNS spoofing. And again, we've seen this many times before where routers have had vulnerabilities which have allowed attacker to change the DNS of that router. So what happens if you can do that? Well, let's close these tabs and go back to the home page and have a look. Now what you're going to start to see as this loads is the tab says scripting news. The website itself says scripting news. It's even worse than it appears. I think at this point we can probably agree on that. Yet the URL in the address bar says btlr.com. Now what I've done here is modified name resolution. So even though the request went to btlr.com, I redirected it to scripting.com. And I loaded a completely different website, also served over HTTP, so subject to all the same risks. I've returned that for a completely different domain. This doesn't happen with HTTPS, because this website that we see in the viewport of the browser, the scripting news website, could not return a valid certificate for the address that we see in the address bar, btlr.com. When there's no HTTPS, you have no guarantees whatsoever that you're actually getting what you've requested. Now I do want to get back to the original site, so I'm going to go and turn off that particular attack. And now that we give the browser a reload, we're back to the original site. Let's go down to the next story. We'll go down to online marketing and see what happens now. So this page is loading up. There's going to be a bit of extra script. And as you can see by the warning here in Chrome, this is malicious script. Now, there's an important point I want to make here, because one of the arguments that I've seen against needing HTTPS on a static site is I've seen people say, well, I don't have any script on the site. If I don't have any script on the site, what could go wrong? Well, you got script on there now, mate, because I'm a man in the middle and I can put whatever I want into that connection. And I want to have a quick look at what it is that I have actually injected into this page. So I'll jump into the source code this time, jump down the bottom, and let's zoom in on this a little bit. So what we're looking at here is what's known as China's Great Cannon. And this is part of a DDoS attack that China mounted against GitHub back in 2015. Turns out China wasn't real happy about a couple of projects that were hosted on GitHub. You can see them here under Great Fire and also the Chinese New York Times. So they mounted a massive man-in-the-middle attack. And the way they did this is when people outside China loaded Baidu, which is like the Chinese Google. Baidu was loaded over HTTP, so you know it can go wrong now when the connection is not secure. And the outbound Chinese gateways injected this script into the pages as people all the way around the world loaded Baidu, expecting just to do a search for whatever it is that people search for on Baidu, but instead having their browser weaponized such that it bombarded those two GitHub repositories with requests. This was a major attack that weaponized a very basic unencrypted page. Now, you may be thinking at this point, well, what harm did this do to the website, say to Baidu, or what harm did this do to the individuals that loaded this page? And the simple answer is it did no direct harm. But the risk demonstrated here is a risk to the broader internet ecosystem. And this is one of the problems we have to deal with when we're serving traffic in an insecure fashion. It puts other parts of the ecosystem at risk. Now, I would like to think that most people would like the internet to operate safely and in a reliable fashion and not be subject to attacks like this. But let's say for a moment you just don't care. Someone else's problem. Let's move on to a much bigger problem for you and your visitors if you're serving a site over a non-secure connection. I'm just going to close this tab and jump back to the home page for a moment. We can unzoom that. And I'll jump down to the next story on what a startup needs. Now, as this page loads, it looks pretty benign. It looks like there's nothing on it of any interest whatsoever. And frankly, that's always the best way to begin by mounting this next attack that I'm going to show you. Rather than look at this page, I'm going to go and drag over a Firefox browser window. And this one has a little tool running in it called Beef, the Browser Exploitation Framework project. You'll see it's loading up off an IP address. This is actually the IP address of a Kali Linux server running in Azure, and Beef is bundled in with that. I deployed it direct from VM Depot and spent about 10 minutes setting it up. I will link to all of that in the notes on the blog post that accompany this video. On the left-hand side of the screen, we can see hooked browsers, and on the domain btlr.com, there is an IP address. This is the outbound IP address of the VPN that I'm currently connected to. So the browser behind Firefox here, the btlr.com one, is presently hooked. We can have a look at what this browser is by loading some information, and we get quite a bit of detail here. Now, just before I drill into this, the context here is that there is one JavaScript file that I've embedded on btlr.com. And of course, I'm a man in the middle. I can do this. I can put whatever I want on the site if I have access to the connection. So now that Beef has hooked that browser, I'm getting a whole bunch of information about what it's running. So that's the first thing. I'm also getting all the cookies on the site as well, so long as those cookies aren't flagged as HTTP only, defense against cross-site scripting right there. This is a lot of info, but this is just the beginning. I want to drag this window back off the screen, and we'll pretend that I'm going to be a remote attacker that now has this target browser hooked. Now, before I start sending commands to this browser, let's remember the pretext that opponents of HTTPS are making. It's just a static site. It doesn't matter. There's nothing sensitive on there. Why should I care? Here's why you should care. I just remotely sent a flash update to this browser. Static website, nothing sensitive, but hey, why not update Flash? And if I was to hover over this image and we look at the bottom left-hand corner in the status bar, we will see that it will load malware.exe from evilcyberhacker.com. And frankly, that naming convention is a lot more generous than what genuinely malicious parties use. When you serve content over an unencrypted connection, you open your visitors up to attacks like this. Let's do another one because this browser is still hooked. I'd like to push something else malicious down now. Here it comes. Now there are no editing tricks with this. I've recorded that in real time and I've simply executed a command to send a Google phishing page down to the browser. Now this is a very convincing looking page. If you just look at the contents of the page, it does look like a legitimate Google login. Of course, if we look at the URL, we can see it's not a legitimate Google domain, but the problem is we know that people are notoriously bad at paying attention to things like the contents of the URL. This is why phishing attacks work so efficiently. When you serve a page over an insecure connection, it makes things like this trivial. But hey, let's go ahead and enter some credentials anyway. I'm going to drop in a username here. BTLR seems reasonable. And a password. Now let's go and sign in and we'll see what happens. This page actually redirects us back out to Gmail in another tab. But the real worrying thing comes when I drag the beef control panel back onto this screen and we have a look at what's actually happened here. I have one result in the run history here, and if I click on that command, we can see in the command results the username, which is BTLR, and the password, which is my secret password. That's all been captured. That's now been sent off to another party, all because the page was served insecurely. That's about the most impactful demo I can give as to why every page, static or not, deserves to be served over HTTPS. And let's just be totally clear about what would have happened here if this page was served over HTTPS. I'm going to close Firefox and then come back, grab a new tab and try to load my blog. And that's it. We're not going anywhere. This is what happens to an intercepted request on an HTTPS connection. Because HTTPS gives us assurance of the connection between the browser and the point at which the connection terminates. Every single risk we've just seen, from unicorns to crypto miners to stealing valuable credentials, goes away. But here's one of the things I think people miss when they're looking at HTTPS, particularly with the likes of static sites. This is not to protect you, the site owner, not directly. It's to protect your visitors who are coming to your website. Now that may be the same discussion as the China situation. Maybe you just don't care, but you should care. Because you shouldn't want to see them falling victim to the things that we've just seen. And the thing is, on a site like the one we've been looking at, why wouldn't you? It is one of the simplest possible things you can do. I mentioned that HTTPS is easy website before, and many people are now going and doing precisely that. It's fast and it's free. And not only that, but it's dead simple to get a stronger HTTPS implementation than what most banks have today. For simple sites like what I've been talking about today, this is a 5-minute job. Okay, maybe 10 minutes in some cases if you really want to lock it down, but you get the point. Lastly, thanks to Jacob for being a good sport. I appreciate the offer to use his site for these purposes, and hopefully this has been an impactful demo. I'll leave you with his full list of projects since 2006.